Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021, the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Leger Fernandez, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader. Under the Speaker's announced policy,
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to talk about the hundreds, no thousands of DACA recipients and dreamers who inspire us every day with their art, resiliency, and strength. Their stories of success, hope, and dreams are the stories of our country and those who truly believe in the American dream. Last week, I went to the Kennedy Center, one of the world's most prestigious performing arts venues, here in this very city to see the Ballet Hispanico. There, I saw Hugo Pisano Orozco, an artist, a dancer, and a dreamer. He is a constituent of mine from Española, New Mexico. Hugo and his family are originally from Guanajuato, Mexico. He came to the United States before he was 2 years old. After moving from Mexico to Española, he fell in love with the art that is dance. He attended the New Mexico School for Arts, which is a very prestigious school in New Mexico dedicated to the arts. But like many others, his future remained uncertain because of his immigration status. As a senior, he didn't know if his DACA status would be granted. Once it was finally approved, though, he applied and was accepted to Juilliard, one of the world's most prestigious performing arts schools. Today, he is a renowned dancer and on tour with Ballet Hispanico. I have a picture of him here because he does inspire with his art form. He inspires me. He soars across the dance floor at the Kennedy Center. I was moved. And so I asked him for his permission to highlight his story, his inspiration to our community and to America of what our dreamers can do when we let them live their dream, when we let them accomplish what they are capable of doing in our beautiful country. His story reminds us of the inspiring stories of thousands of dreamers across our country. His family brought him to the United States in search of a better life, and he found his American dream. His story reflects the best of us and what the American dream is truly about, hope and dreams for a better future. Like so many others, his story inspires me, gives me hope, and why I stand here today. He soars from New Mexico and graces America with his stunning performances, but we find dreamers in every state, in every community. I want to echo his words today. He said, I quote, "Don't think because you're from a small town in New Mexico, you can't go out there and do the things you want to do," end quote. We need to remember that small things can do, that small places can do big things. Yes, small places can do big things. Our dreamers come from all walks of life, small towns, big cities, the rural areas, suburbia, everywhere. They believe they could do more, and with the DACA, they have done more. Like Cindy Nava, a fellow New Mexican who came from Chihuahua, New Mexico, seeking a better life. Now as a 35-year-old, she's actually the first ever DACA recipient to achieve a presidential appointment to work in the Biden administration as a senior policy advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. She now works for Marcia Fudge. Hugo and Cindy are two of the more than 5,000 DACA recipients who make New Mexico a more vibrant place to live. But none of this would have been possible if we didn't have DACA. With the recent court rulings, however, DACA is in immediate danger. We need our Senate Republican colleagues to rise to the moment. We passed out of this House in spring of 2021 the Dream and Promise Act. We now need the Senate to act and work with us to pass a bipartisan legislation before the end of the year, because it is now or never for our dreamers. I would now like to recognize the gentlewoman from my vecina from Texas for as long as she may take.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Speaker, I rise to call upon our colleagues in the Senate to protect DACA recipients before the end of this Congress. 6 years old, Mr. Speaker, 6 years old. That's the average age recipients of DACA were when they first entered the U.S. through no fault of their own. Known as Dreamers, these young people have served in our military, attended our schools, and worked in our communities. They've grown up here, eagerly contributing to our neighborhoods and the diversity that makes America great. They are Americans in their heart, in their soul, and in their minds, because this is the only country that they have known. Many of them are now educated doctors, trusted lawyers, committed school teachers, and essential workers. In fact, more than 200,000 of them worked as essential workers during the pandemic, keeping us safe, keeping us healthy. Now, because of right-wing attacks on our community's all-stars, their futures is uncertain. Madam Speaker, Dreamers need action, and they need it now. In my home state, in Texas, nearly 100,000 Dreamers are at risk for facing risk of deportation, and 30,000 of them live in my hometown of Houston. They are not strangers. They're not Martians coming in from some alien nation. We're talking about our friends, our neighbors, people we go to church with, people we buy groceries with, people that are just down the street, and they are also part of our families. For our community, it is now or never. The Senate must put Dreamers over the political tactics of fear and hate. It's simple. We need to put people over politics. We need to put Dreamers over rhetoric. The time is now. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back to Ms. Fernandez.
Thank you so very much, Representative Garcia. And we know that Americans want DACA to become codified. They want our Dreamers to live here. Indeed, in the United States, we know that a bipartisan poll conducted in October 22 found overwhelming support. Democrats, independents, Republicans all support this. Democrats support it at 93%, independents at 75%, and our Republican neighbors, they also support it at 71%. This needs to happen. This needs to happen for us to truly live up to the promise that we could be. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus is holding this special order hour. I welcome all of my colleagues who have come to speak here before us today. But right now, I'd like to recognize our chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, who has come with his twins, his two daughters, to share with us his thoughts on Dreamers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise today as chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, as a father of these two beautiful daughters of mine, Sky and Sage, to call on the Senate to act now for Dreamers. This October, the Fifth Circuit Court ruled that the DACA program is unlawful and set the stage for this incredibly successful and popular program to be struck down by the conservative courts in Texas. If Congress does not act by the end of this year, the future of thousands of Dreamers will be on the line. Dreamers like Juan Vasquez from my district, in fact from Mecca, who as a senior in high school was detained by ICE while working in the fields as a farm worker with his parents to help them pay the bills. After taking him under my wing as a pre-med student, Juan graduated top of his class from UC Berkeley and finished top of his class at UC San Francisco School of Medicine. Now, he saves lives. He saves American lives. He saves fathers and mothers and children's daughters and sons and grandparents every day as an emergency medicine resident in New York City. I think I had some influence being an emergency physician myself and mentoring him in that path. But if DACA ends, Juan and hundreds of thousands of others will lose their jobs, impacting labor market sectors already experiencing shortages such as healthcare, education, service industries, food productions, and more. If DACA ends, our economy would lose more than $250 billion in lost GDP over the next decade. If DACA ends, prices will go up. If DACA ends, we will see dire and insurmountable ripple effects across our communities and local economies. So, for the sake of doing what is right and good and just, and for the sake of our economy, and for the hundreds of thousands of dreamers who call our nation home and have known no other home, I call on the Senate, Republicans, to join in good faith negotiations to find a permanent solution for dreamers based on the House-passed Dream and Promise Act. Use it as the framework. And I urge every member of this body, Republicans and Democrats, to join the Congressional Hispanic Caucus in advocating for a bipartisan DACA deal to be included in the end-of-the-year omnibus package. So we absolutely must deliver peace of mind for dreamers and their families, keep their families together, and create opportunity for our economy. The time to act is now. The time of urgency is now. Thank you. And I want to thank you, Chairwoman, for your leadership, for being vice chair of the communications for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, because your voice is powerful. Your voice carries on. Your voice is a voice of true leadership that will continue and be generational. And I appreciate this special hour to advocate for our dreamers and to protect DACA.
Well, Chairman, I want to thank you for bringing Sky and Sage to the floor of the House today, because as we look at these beautiful, intelligent, curious children, and curious is one of the best things to be, you know, because that means you're curious about the world around you. They are the age of many of our DACA recipients who came with their parents and searched. Their parents came. They made the choice. And the children came with them. And this is the only home many of the DACA recipients have ever known. And what have they done in this home? They have brought so many of us joy. They have helped make our schools vibrant. They are caring for our children, for your children, as doctors, as teachers, as nurses, as accountants. I mean, they're all walks of life, right? Some of them choose to go into accountancy. We have the stories here, numerous, from every state and every district, of those who chose to apply for DACA protections. Right now, we know that because of the Fifth Circuit decision that declared DACA unlawful, that these hundreds of young dreamers and families are afraid for their futures. And we must act. I would now yield such time as he may require to the gentleman from California, Congressman Correa.
Thank you very much. And Madam Speaker, if I may, I just wanted to say that the Dreamer issue is not about immigrants. It's about America. Dreamers are the perfect kind of immigrant that you want in this country. They follow the law. They pay taxes. They're either gainfully employed or have to be studying in order to qualify as a dreamer under the DACA program. 70 to 80% of all Americans, Democrats and Republicans, support a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. There are friends, there are neighbors, firefighters, police officers, and they also serve in the military. Here, poster of one of my constituents, Jose Angel Caribay. He was the first service member from Orange County to make the ultimate sacrifice for America after 9/11 in Iraq. He died as a dreamer, as a non-citizen. Later on, this body saw it appropriate to give him U.S. citizenship posthumously. Jose shouldn't have waited until after he passed away to become a U.S. citizen, because he made the ultimate sacrifice for his new country, the only country he knew, the United States of America. I'm proud to inform you that I represent probably the largest number of dreamers in the country. Orange County, California. Orange County, that county that Ronald Reagan used to say was a place that good Republicans would go to die. Not very long ago, my daughter came home with two of her very good friends. They're both very scared, crying, said, "We're dreamers. Are we going to be deported? What do we do?" Good, sweet young ladies, students. And I told them, I said, you keep studying hard, you keep working hard, you keep following the law, you keep being a good person, and let us work on legislation in Washington. Today, my simple ask from the Senate is, do the right thing. Stop treating dreamers as political footballs when you kick them whenever it's appropriate. I ask the Senate to please pass the dreamer legislation and give those 2 million dreamers the opportunity to earn, not to be given, but earn a pathway to the American dream. Again, 70 to 80% of Americans agree with this concept. Let's do our job. Let's continue to keep America as the greatest country in the world. Madam Speaker, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing us the story of such bravery and such sacrifice. Because across this country, the dreamers are participating in every single aspect of our lives, whether it be defending our country in the United States or abroad. They are firefighters. I have a story here of an amazing firefighter who is from Sacramento, California, and was one of the first firefighters who, as a dreamer. He has now moved on and is pursuing additional studies so that he can pursue a career in providing in health to serve as a PA. And we know that in so many of our areas, we don't have enough doctors and nurses and PAs and nurse practitioners, and yet this dreamer is engaged in that very area of study. And over again, if we deny the dreamers their ability to continue to contribute to our country, we will suffer, whether that be in the area of health, as we just heard from one of our speakers, from our chair, or the area of the arts, or as the numerous teachers, the numerous dreamers have chosen as their area of expertise and their way of giving back to teach our youngest. I would now like to yield to the gentleman from Illinois. Congressman, please share with us what you know is happening in Illinois with the numerous dreamers that live in both your city and in your state.
Thank you, Representative Fernandez and Madam Speaker. I rise today with fellow members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus because we're running out of time to save the DACA program. And we can save the program through congressional action in the waning days of this Congress. Since 2012, DACA has created a glimpse of hope. DACA provides temporary legal status to thousands of people who no other country than ours in the United States. They are our teachers, our nurses, our firefighters, our friends, our neighbors, and our loved ones. Let's be clear, 75% of the American people support DACA. We know it strengthens our economy and makes us a better country, and both Republicans and Democrats agree. Still, the program has faced multiple court challenges, and if we don't do something to save it, the program will end. We need to save the DACA program not only because it grows our economy, but because it's simply the right thing to do. Let me tell you Yesenia's story. When it became time for a driver's license in high school, Yesenia's teacher forced her to provide a Social Security card, even though he knew Yesenia was undocumented and did not plan to get a license and had no real need to bring a Social Security card to class. When Yesenia was unable to produce a Social Security card, a classmate mocked her, saying, "She can't bring it because she's illegal." Yesenia nearly broke down in tears. Thanks to DACA, Yesenia was afforded a stability she's never known, no longer carrying the fear of being deported or separated from her family. Or think about Elizabeth. She would wake up at 3:30 a.m. every day to prepare tamales and sell them before hurrying to school. She did this through elementary and middle school. Classmates belittled Elizabeth, calling her La Tamalera. Like Yesenia, Elizabeth applied for DACA when the program was created. Eventually, Elizabeth saved enough by selling tamales to pay her way through college. This is what they do. This is who they are. Both Elizabeth and Yesenia are my constituents. And to my colleagues in the Senate, DACA recipients are your constituents too. Every DACA recipient has a story of homes lost and new homes found, stories of growing up, stories of pain and perseverance that demand action. Ending DACA will shatter the lives of nearly 2 million people in our country brought here as children. And it will hurt their families as well. It will separate families and tear communities apart. The stakes could not be higher. The end of DACA would uproot the lives of 600,000 DACA recipients in addition to the more than 1.3 million migrants eligible for the program. Aside from the fact that DACA recipients pay almost $10 billion in taxes each year, aside from the fact that more than 200,000 DACA recipients across the country stepped up for us as frontline workers during the pandemic, our obligation to save DACA above all else is a moral one. It's about who we are as a country. The House has done its job. We passed the Dream and Promise Act, and now we need the Senate to act on it. It's time to step up, save DACA, and codify it through congressional action.
Thank you so much, Congressman Garcia. And thank you so much for sharing the economic impacts of DACA recipients. Because we need to highlight that any opposition to the Dream and Promise Act is not based on the benefits it brings to our country, because the economic benefits are amazing. And that's, I so appreciate the fact that you raised it. You know, you said how much taxes are paid. Households with DACA recipients pay $5.6 billion in federal taxes and $3.1 billion in state and local taxes every single year. And they create lots of after-tax income that leads to economic activity in the communities that they come from. In fact, the importance of DACA and our Dreamers is so great that we had on October 20th, 80 major businesses and trade associations wrote to congressional leaders in support of a bipartisan Dream and Promise Act. The letter was signed by, among others, the National Association of Manufacturers, the National Retail Federation, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Microsoft, Amazon, and many, many more, because we know that Dreamers are essential to our economy. And what would happen if we let DACA die? If we let DACA die, an average of 1,000 Dreamers will lose their jobs each week in labor markets already experiencing shortages such as healthcare, education, service industries, food production, and more, because they'd lose their jobs as their ability to renew would disappear. So every week we would lose that. It's like a drumbeat towards financial trouble when we already need to address the need for more workers in our country. We would lose the benefit that they develop for our economy, $400 billion in economic benefit if we pass the Dream and Promise Act. Because we need to say, we're not just trying to save DACA. We actually want DACA to end because we're going to replace it with the Dream and Promise Act. We are looking for the Dream and Promise Act because that ends DACA the way it should, not by death to a court that doesn't understand the benefit of this, but to the codification to give our Dreamers the path to citizenship they deserve. And that's why we are calling upon the Senate. We're asking to have all of the Democrat senators presently support the Dream and Promise Act. So what we are looking for is 10 Republican senators to join with the Chamber of Commerce, to join with the trade associations, to join with the people across this country, to join with their own constituents. I think we need to remember the amount of Republicans who support the Dream and Promise Act in the 70s. You know, it is what our constituents want us to do. It is what the Senate constituents want them to do from whatever state you're at. And we must ask the Senate to take action now. Let's codify this. Let's not punt down the road any more times. Let's actually pass the Dream and Promise Act. Everybody wants it because we know that without it, the consequences are dire. I also want to remind everybody that many of these Dreamers are in mixed status households, as we say. The Dreamers live with their children, if they're old enough, who are citizens. They live with spouses who may be citizens and legal residents, and they provide for the families at the same time that they are providing for our communities. They are providing for their families. And they come from many, many countries, not just Latin American countries. If you'll notice up here, I cannot read it, but Koreans. We have many, many DACA recipients who speak Korean. We have DACA recipients who speak all of the different languages of our world because they come from the many countries of our world to the United States. They have been brought here. And once here, well, we have to remember the Dream and Promise Act has been introduced time and time again. And the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, was put in place as a placeholder so that we could pass the Dream and Promise Act. The placeholder is calling upon us now to act. The placeholder must be replaced with the Dream and Promise Act so that our children, those who will lead us up and will lead great lives in our community, can find that path to citizenship. And so that's what we are asking our colleagues in the Senate to do. We sent you this bill months and months ago. You saw this bill in the 2015, you saw this bill in the 2016, you saw this bill in the 115th, 116th, 117th Congress. And now it's time to pass it. Now or never. Because we cannot wait. We cannot wait for the courts to act because Congress's duty is to act. Our duty is to see a problem and take action to correct it. In Jeremiah 29:11, God's plan for us is not to suffer, but to have prosperity, hope, and a future. Our job in Congress is to create that prosperity, hope, and a future. And this bill, the Dream and Promise Act, helps accomplish that plan to create prosperity, hope, and a future for those who have come and lived in our communities from the youngest of age. And so we call upon the Senate to act. On behalf of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, I am proud to stand with my colleagues who stood here and spoke in favor of passing the Dream and Promise Act, because make no mistake, the DACA program is the result of the failure of Congress to live up to its obligation to create that prosperity, hope, and a future. And we need the DACA kids to continue their education. We need those who have been in this country from a very young age to be able to assert and have the protections of those who are presently enrolled in DACA. Dreamers have been raised and educated here. They work in our communities, they raise their families, they attend our colleges. They serve in our military. They die for the country and the home that they have known. We now ask Congress, we ask the Senate Republicans to hear those dreams and to pass the Dream and Promise Act. In whatever vehicle it must be, we urge them to consider including it in the omnibus, to include it in the NDAA, but to pass it. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent that we have. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on this special order.
Without objection. The gentlewoman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4, 2021, the gentleman from Texas,